What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about another UDFA signing by the Detroit Lions. This UDFA signing is Jonathan Adams Jr., the receiver out of Arkansas State that put up some monster numbers. This is Mr. Highlight Reel. No? Is that cool? Let's get it started.
You know, I got to shout out DoseOfDion, man, because it was actually the first time I went live on YouTube. And, you know, guys don't know DoseOfDion. He put out a lot of good content for the Detroit Lions.
Welcome everybody to our video. I'm glad you guys are here. And yeah, so I came up with the nickname Mr. Highlight Reel. I'm trying to come up with nicknames for these signings. So the last one was Contested Catch Artist. This is Mr. Highlight Reel because his highlight reel is awesome. If you look up Jonathan Adams Jr. highlights, you're going to be like, dang, this is the best receiver in the class. Unfortunately, he's not, but his highlight reel would suggest that he might be. It's just that fun to watch. It really is. So we're going to call him Mr. Highlight Reel, but the highlights aren't everything. You got to watch the film. You got to watch the entire game. You got to see the good and the bad. But the good is very good, but the bad, it's pretty bad. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video, Jonathan Adams Jr. Also, before we get into that, I want to give you guys some Detroit Lions news. The Lions have signed a long snapper. This long snapper is Scott Daly, the long snapper that was with Notre Dame. Oh my goodness, what is it about these Notre Dame? With Notre Dame, then with the Dallas Cowboys, an XFL player as well. He's 27 years old, and I guess this is just some competition for Don Muhlbach. Now, Muhlbach was signed back to a one-year deal for the season, but it also gives the Lions some connections, maybe for down the road as well. Maybe if Muhlbach, isn't here down the road. So I just thought, that was important to bring up there. The Lions have signed a long snapper. Instead of drafting one, we just signed one. I like that. That's a pretty good decision there to bring in some competition. But now let's talk about this receiver out of Arkansas State that I call Mr. Highlight Reel, because there's a lot of good. His highlight reel is awesome. I mean, it really is. But there's also a lot of bad, like leading the FBS in drops last season. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a pretty big problem. So last season, Jonathan Adams had 78 receptions for over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns for Arkansas State. That's outstanding. Great. Not the best competition, but his stats are really, really good. He's gotten some knocks for his drops and things like that, of course, and there are reasons to knock his drops, but I want to do a little bit of a comparison here. Now, this is not me saying that this is who he is or who he will be, but I just thought it was a kind of entertaining comparison. And this is Kenny Golladay in his final stats at Northern Illinois in 2016. Now, Kenny Golladay was a third-round pick, not an undrafted free agent. Golladay just got paid, was it $18 million, something like that, a year by the New York Giants. The dude just got a bag, okay? So congratulations, Kenny Golladay. But I just wanted to compare some statistics. Kenny Golladay was not playing against the best competition in the MAC, and neither is Jonathan Adams Jr. But I thought we could just at least compare their stats, just for entertainment purposes alone, okay? So let's compare the stats. These are Jonathan Adams Jr.'s stats last season with Arkansas State compared to Kenny Galladay's stats in his final year at Northern Illinois. Kenny Golladay caught 59.3% of his passes, while Jonathan Adams Jr. caught 64% of his passes. Kenny Golladay had 1,156 yards. Jonathan Adams had 1,106 yards, so only a 50 yards difference. Jonathan Adams had 12 receiving touchdowns to Kenny Galladay's 8 receiving touchdowns. Again, these are all in 1 year. And then Kenny Golladay had 13.3 yards per completion. Meanwhile, Jonathan Adams Jr. had 14.2 yards per completion. Kenny Golladay hit 3.5 yards after the catch on average. Meanwhile, Jonathan Adams had 3.3 yards after the catch on average. So you can see statistically across the board, they're very, very comparable. Very, very comparable. Some things Jonathan Adams has the leg up. Other things Kenny Golladay does. But the big difference here is that Golladay had 4 drops compared to 11. 11 drops for Jonathan Adams Jr. last season. Now, when you get as many targets as he did, that's 121 targets in a season, you're bound to have some drops. You're bound to have some mess ups, some misses. But his were a little bit over the top, and that's one of the biggest concerns, and that's probably a big reason that he went undrafted, amongst other things as well. Now, when you look at his pro day numbers, they're not going to blow you away. They weren't that great, to be honest with you, and really his agility numbers were not very good. He did have a pretty good I wouldn't even say it's pretty good. It was an okay 40. It was a 4.59 time, but he had a 39-inch vertical, which is very good, and a 132-inch broad jump. So he had the explosive numbers really good, and actually to back that up, his 10-yard split on his 40 time, it was really, really good. If you look at relative athletic score, that is what really stands out when you look at his agility or speed. It's the 10-yard split, 1.56 seconds. Now, that's very important, okay? Explosiveness, the first 10 yards is extremely important because how often are you running your 40-yard dash compared to how often are you, running that 10-yard split? How fast can you get there? It's really the acceleration, okay? How long does it take you? Or are you just a long build-up type of runner, or can you get there in a hurry? He does have some of that explosiveness, and it's shown in that 10-yard split. So I thought that was a very important number for him that can get very overlooked and very, tossed out of the way, that was important to bring up because that's one of the biggest parts to me of his game. One of the biggest strengths, actually, of his game. With a hairline fracture in his hip, so I thought I would bring up the injury there. Let's get into the strengths and the weaknesses of Jonathan Adams Jr. game, because as many strengths as there are also a lot of weaknesses, and that's probably why he was undrafted. Some people believe he could have been a mid-round target. There's definitely things that you love, but there's also things that you don't love, okay? And like we said, he led the FBS in drops, but he was also a highlight reel kind of guy. So it makes sense that there was some things to love and things that you don't love. Let's start from the first part. And this isn't really specifics in terms of just playing receiver. It's more about the mentality, okay? He was the go-to guy for Arkansas State. He had over 120 targets, and that's not by accident. That's by design, okay? They wanted to get in the ball. It seemed like every time they threw it, it was going his direction, and that's not the case. But it just seemed like that when you watched him. Now, a lot of that was because he would make a play on the football, but I also felt like he brought a great mentality to be the go-to guy. He brought that alpha mentality where when the ball was in the air, he wanted to embarrass the cornerback. He wanted to make some highlight reel grab. Sometimes maybe he got a little greedy with the one-handed tries, but for the most part, I mean, it was a great mentality as a receiver. And then as a blocker, when he was engaged as a blocker, he could lay some huge blocks, he could open up some huge holes, and he could move his cornerbacks or safety or whoever was lined up across him out of the way to open up lanes for his running backs. Now, every once in a while, he'd get kind of lazy with it and kind of just stand there, but when he was engaged as a blocker, he could be very dominant. Now, I've read that most scouts don't worry too much about receivers and blocking. It doesn't really, affect how they feel about a certain receiver. I don't know how this regime feels, but I felt like the last one did care about blocking. So if you want a guy that can block, and for the most part will block, I would say Jonathan Adams Jr. does have that trait to his game. Now you get into more of these specifics, and this is the route running, this is the release, and this is the pass catching, and all that. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the release first, okay? This is the first part as receiver. And he could definitely win at the college level with his release, and I have no issue and no concern with him at the next level with his release. It didn't seem as explosive as maybe that 10-yard split would suggest. I felt like that was actually more explosive when he would make a double move down the field to try to get open deep. I do think that he has all the traits to definitely be fine off the release at the next level, especially if he's getting pressed. He's got the size and he's got enough explosiveness to do it. At the college level, he really had no issue. It was pretty simple. I mean, for the most part, he would just fake the direction that he wasn't going and work back the other direction, but it was fine. It worked for him. Sometimes, maybe again, he might have got slightly lazy with some of his releases and they weren't explosive, especially in off coverage where guys weren't right up against him. But for the most part, I have no concerns about him at the next level getting off the release. You would just like to see, more explosiveness consistently there. Sometimes he could get a little slow off the release. All right. Then you get into the route running, and this is usually where he gets the biggest knock. Now, sometimes he makes some beautiful cuts, and it's just, oh my gosh. I mean, he gets a lot of separation there, but it's definitely not on the consistent side. And a lot of that has to do because he had a very limited route tree. Notes of the routes that I saw. And for the most part, it was pretty simplistic. It fit his strengths, which is what you're supposed to do. He ran a lot of go routes. He ran some in routes, some out routes, some curl routes, comeback routes, things like that, or some drags and slants, but there wasn't a lot of intermediate production there. And I think one of the biggest knocks here as a route runner is that he definitely has a tendency to stand tall, stand high, out of breaks, and it slows him down. It really does. And it doesn't pose as a threat then to cornerbacks because he runs his breaks super high and they can stay connected with him out of breaks. So he's going to have to get more consistent there as a route runner, get more polished, and you're going to want to see more routes that he can run because, Arkansas State just ran to what he did well, and that makes sense, but it hasn't shown that he could be a complete receiver that can run any route that you ask of him. Not be the most polished thing stepping in day one. Like I said, he's really got to break down better and sink into those routes as a route runner after some coaching, after good coaching. And we have Antoine Randall L. that should be holding that down. Need for route running would be coming out of those double moves. Like I said, he wasn't great coming out of breaks and he didn't sink extremely well, but he did sell double moves pretty well. And I think this is where you saw that 10-yard split really show up. And some of those corners had a very big issue with it. It would just take, a simple, stop route, a stop and go, something very basic that could get him on top of a corner. And he got on top of corners way more than you would think if you simply looked at his 40 time. He could get on top of a corner in a hurry. The better corners did a great job of keeping him in front. All right. Just not allowing him to get deep, not biting on any of those fakes. And one of those guys were A.J. Parker. Who's A.J. Parker? Well, we signed A.J. Parker from Kansas State. I thought that was interesting, and that probably had something to do with them signing him, because if you watch A.J. Parker, when he is defending Jonathan Adams Jr., he was one of the more disciplined corners that did a fantastic job of not biting on any of those double moves, not falling for those fakes, and allowing him to get on top as a receiver, because, of course, he's already going to usually out-muscle you in terms of size, so he did a great job of keeping everything in front, and quarterback would still try to lead him, and he wasn't able to get over the top. So at that point, that's when you have to, really throw those back shoulder passes. Some of these cornerbacks were not disciplined disciplined to do that, but AJ Parker was. So I'm thinking that had something to do with them signing him. I'm just saying, I think it did. If you want to see that, it's Arkansas State against Kansas State. He is wearing number 12. It comes to the pass catching, and this is where you find, the dips, you find the valleys, and then you also find the peaks, the mountaintops. As he has some highlight reel grabs that get off your chair and say, oh my gosh, why was this not a top 10 receiver? It's that kind of thing. He has one of the most exciting highlight reels, and that's why I'm calling him Mr. Highlight Reel, because, man, if you look Jonathan Adams Jr. highlights up, you're going to be blown away. And you're going to think, man, this guy is fantastic. But then if you watch the film, you'll see the values, you'll see the lows as a pass catcher, where it's not always as consistent. Now, when you have over 120 targets, you're bound to have some drops, you're bound to have some misses. It's just going to happen. But at the same time, you're bound to have some great grabs when you have that many targets, when you have that many passes thrown your way. And in the NFL with the Lions, even though our receiving core isn't great, he's probably not going to be the go-to guy, at least year one, okay? That's assuming he makes the team. So for him, he's going to have to take advantage of those opportunities that he does get. And that's where the consistency does scare you because, again, 11 drops led the FBS. I think he's best as a pass catcher. Well, he, like Sage Surratt, is a great back shoulder type of pass catcher, okay? You throw back shoulder passes when he's running go routes, he's fantastic at body positioning. It's something that Sage also does extremely well because he had to do it because his speed wasn't fantastic. He is a great job of positioning his body to put himself in a spot, really take the defender out of the play and allow himself to make a play on the football. Back shoulder passes were, usually one of the best things that you could throw this guy's way. Of course, you could throw fade routes. He played with usually very strong hands, and he loved to play through that contact. So back shoulder passes, no issue there whatsoever. You throw him some back shoulder routes, and he's going to be usually more times than not coming down with the football. And he also has that sideline awareness. You'll see him toe tap in the end zone. He has the awareness of where the sideline is, and a lot of times he does get 2 feet down, which is great because at the next level, you got to get 2 feet down. So it's awesome. And you see the concerns at the pass catcher, and there's really, I would say, mainly 2 areas where I see concerns here. Number one is when passes are a little bit long, they're a little bit in front of him, they're a little bit overthrown. It's extending for a football as far as you possibly can with your arms and still coming away, with the football, reaching out, being able to snag it and bring it into your body. That is where you see an issue. A lot of times it almost looks like he's short arming. It makes it, a little bit of an issue for quarterbacks because he doesn't have the best top end speed, and then he doesn't do a great job of extending for a football that's led in front of him that may even be slightly overthrown. He's just not great at that, at snagging those extended passes, maybe some fingertip grabs, and bringing them into his body. The thing that I don't love is when passes are really low. When passes are low, they're near the dirt, kind of scooping it off, not literally on the ground, but when they're low passes and it, forces him to bend down, reach down near the ground, and pick it up and basically scoop it, he's not great at that either. Okay, trying to scoop balls off the ground is definitely not his strength, and it looks uncomfortable and awkward at times. As a pass catcher, you love the fact that he tries to catch everything seemingly with his hands, regardless if there's a defender in his area or not. That's awesome. You want to catch with your hands. But when he catches with his body, which you don't want to do, but obviously there's going to be times when you do it, he's not a very good body pass catcher, which I guess really sounds weird. It doesn't sound like it makes any sense. But when he catches with his body, it looks bad. It usually just bounces off his shoulder pads and it hits the ground. That's one area as a pass catcher which is not very good. You can tell where he's at his best, and that is high pointing, back shoulder, coming back to the ball, positioning himself. You throw that ball up there for grabs, all right, that's when he's like, oh yeah, it's go time. Not necessarily leading him, but just giving him a shot, making it a 50-50 ball. That's where he loves it, especially if his back shoulder can be towards the sideline. He relishes those opportunities, all right? Not the relish that you put on your hot dog. You could throw fades to him in the end zone. You could throw up a 50-50 ball because that seems to be his biggest strengths. He catches the majority of those. Majority of the time he's coming down with the football in those situations. I do see sometimes an inability to snag it and bring it into his body if a good defender, a disciplined defender, like an AJ Parker, can get his hands into the body and really, punch that ball out while he's trying to bring it back in. Not a complete pass catcher. He does leave some pass catches out there that just are jaw-dropping. It's just like, oh my goodness, this was just like one of the best things I've ever seen. And he looks dominant at those times. But that's why he has so many highlight grabs, but also 11 drops, okay? Because he has some focus drops, but it just looks uncomfortable in some of those, easier pass catches. He catches everything with his hands, but when it gets through his hands, when it comes to his body, that's when things look ugly. And like I said, picking things off the ground, lower passes, it just does not look right. He can run some drags. He'll catch drags. Biggest strength here is playing like a basketball player, boxing out his defender, and really just positioning himself to go up and get it. Ball tracking can be, I think, slightly hit and miss here. For the most part, it's usually pretty good, especially when it's a high point pass. But as I mentioned, sometimes it looks like he's short arming it. I think sometimes it also may be that he didn't track the ball extremely well and he didn't put himself in a great spot where maybe when he ran around, he's led to get himself in a spot to actually make the catch. When I say ball tracking, I don't mean simply just seeing the football while it's in the air. I mean like tracking the football to time up your attempt to make a pass catch. Like, for example, sometimes I think he times up his vertical wrong and, he'll kind of mistime it. The full potential of how high he can actually jump and take advantage of that, and he'll miss the football. Where not everything is super crisp yet. Again, the top end speed isn't the best here, so that's obviously an issue with that as well. And his arms aren't extremely long. I mean, they're good size, but they're not extremely long. So I think sometimes his ball tracking can be slightly off. Definitely a lot of upside as a pass catcher, and just certain things that he does that a lot of receivers just can't simply do. All right, now I get the competition wasn't great. Consistently, he puts up crazy production because he is the go-to guy. I think it was like 10 of his games, he had at least 90 yards receiving, which is just insane. And obviously, that's why he had over 1,100 yards receiving, because like I said, that's not something that's by accident, that's by design, catching 65% of his passes. Now, at the next level, 65% is really good, especially being a deep threat, but you wonder how much, if that's going to take a drop at the next level because of some of his drops. His yak, he does bring a little bit of yak to the game. There's a little bit of explosiveness there. Like I said, it's a little bit less than what Golladay had at 3.3 yards after the catch, but there's a little bit there. He'll get some screen opportunities, which obviously bumped up his receptions. You'll see him on some drags, and he'll have some yak there as well. And he does have a pretty wide radius to throw to. Okay, if you just get it near him, usually he can at least touch the football. There's a great vertical there. There's some explosiveness there, and obviously he's a pretty big body target. As long as he's not short arming, he's a very wide radius, and it allows for missed passes, especially in shorter areas or attacking a zone where things don't have to be right in his chest. They can be a little off, and he's still be able to reach out and make some of those grabs. And he does play through contact well. There's just inconsistencies in certain areas of the game where he just doesn't look extremely comfortable yet. So I think for him, it's like, hey man, the ceiling is super high, but there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up. This is not, you're ready right now to go, but throughout the offseason with good coaching, he could start on to a slow roll. I think he could definitely make the team. I think he will make the team. I should say that. All right, we'll see. I hope he makes the team, but it'll probably be a very slow roll, but it's something that as time goes on, he can start to pick up and become a bigger and bigger part of your offense. There are some athletic limitations here. Even though he's not slow, he definitely is not as fast as some of these other guys in his class, as most other guys in his class. He's definitely on the below average side of top end speed, but there is enough explosiveness here. He just really needs to, get much quicker at, sinking into routes, being more flexible, coming down to the ground, snagging some of those. Maybe it's flexibility that's an issue. Like I said, it's not polished. There's a lot more routes that you want to add to his route tree. There's a lot of things that you want to see him be able to intermediate and some honestly short area passes, but things that you can't teach, he definitely has. He definitely has things that he can't teach in terms of size, positioning, going up and just snagging the ball out of the air, and the mentality that he brings. There's a reason he was the go-to guy. I know the competition was great, but I think when you compare those stats to Golladay, what he had coming out of college, really puts things in perspective on how high his ceiling could actually be. But at the same time, he definitely has tons of things that he needs to clean up. The reason that he went undrafted, teams realize that. And while his ceiling is extremely high, the question is, can you get him to that ceiling? Can you get him to where maybe you think that he could be? Not even the ceiling, could you get him to where you think he could be? Because right now, there's a lot of things to work on, but there's also so many things that he brings that just not a lot of receivers honestly have in this draft. But the fact that the Lions got him undrafted is what makes it great, because there's really no risk to it. If you took him in the 4th or 5th round, there's some risk there because you used a pick on it. But in this case, you didn't use a pick. There's really no risk. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That stinks. But if it does, you could have looked at an absolute bargain here. A guy that I thought was probably going to get drafted. Some people thought he could slide into day 2 because of the upside, but he didn't. And now you have an upside player that could turn into, honestly, a pretty nice part of this offense. And if you look at Kenny Golladay, go read what they said about him coming out. Some people were worried about his day 1 impact, not being able to have much of it. But we saw, the questions about his separation, him running a 4.5 40. Like stage threat and the things that you just have to trust him, but NFL quarterbacks can do that because NFL quarterbacks realize you're not going to consistently be open. I got to take some chances when I throw it your direction. And that's kind of the same thing here with Jonathan Adams. But more times than not at college, he came down with those passes. Adams Jr. better make the team, because I think this would be a sick shirt to have. So make the teams, that way I can wear your shirt, okay? So there are a lot of things to refine, but there's a lot of things to his game that just make you fall in love. Mr. Highlight Reel is a Detroit line. I love it. It's Jonathan Adams Jr., man. Good luck. Hopefully you make the team. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.